Hello, friends, and welcome back to Compelling Stories for a Dinner Party. I'm your host, Christopher James, and tonight we delve into a chilling mystery that has perplexed and haunted many for decades. This is the disappearance of the Sodder children. Our story begins in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, on a cold and festive Christmas Eve in the year 1945. The Sodder family, a well-respected household in the community, was preparing for a night of celebration, unaware that it would soon turn into a nightmare. George and Jenny Sodder, along with 9 of their 10 children, were tucked away in their home, surrounded by the warmth of family and the joy of the holiday season. But as the night deepened, disaster struck. A fire erupted, consuming their home and bringing a night of joy to an abrupt and tragic end. By dawn, the house was reduced to ashes, and 5 of the Sodder children were nowhere to be found. Officially, it was said that the children perished in the fire. However, no physical evidence of their remains was ever found. George and Jenny Sodder believed otherwise, convinced that their children had survived and that the fire was only a cover for a much darker plot. What followed was a relentless quest for truth that would span decades, uncovering more questions than answers. Before we delve deeper into the mystery of that Christmas Eve, let's take a moment to understand the roots of the Sodder family, whose story is as much about the American dream as it is about the enigmatic tragedy that befell them. George Sodder, born Giorgio Sodu in Tula, Sardinia, Italy in 1895, was a man of strong convictions and even stronger ambitions. At the tender age of 13, he immigrated to the United States, arriving at Ellis Island with his older brother, who would soon return to Italy, leaving George to forge his path alone in this new world. Settling first in Pennsylvania, George worked on the railroads, carrying water and supplies to laborers, a job that demanded grit and resilience. His determination soon led him to Smithers, West Virginia, where he took a more permanent job as a driver and eventually met Jenny Cipriani, a storekeeper's daughter who had also emigrated from Italy. Their shared heritage and dreams of a prosperous life in America quickly drew them together. In 1923, George and Jenny married and moved to Fayetteville, West Virginia, a town with a robust community of Italian immigrants. Here, George started his own trucking company, initially hauling fill dirt to construction sites and later coal from the region's prolific mines. Their family grew along with George's business, and they became one of the most respected middle-class families in town. However, George was a man who never shied away from speaking his mind. His outspoken opposition to Italian dictator Benito Mussolini often led to heated arguments within the local community, some of whom still held sympathies for the regime back in Italy. This stance would later cast a long shadow over the events of December 1945. As the Sodder family adorned their home with festive decorations and prepared for Christmas celebrations, they were unaware of the dark turn their lives were about to take. As the clock ticked closer to midnight on Christmas Eve, the Sodder family was engulfed in the cheerful chaos typical of a large family celebration. Marion, the eldest daughter, had returned home with gifts for her younger siblings, sparking joy and laughter that filled the house. The evening progressed, with the children asking permission to stay up late, a small yet significant deviation from their usual routine, allowed by their mother, Jenny. As the younger children played with their new toys and the older ones shared stories of the day, George and Jenny eventually retired to bed, leaving the home still bustling with activity. However, the night took a drastic turn when, at 1 a.m., Jenny was jolted awake by a sharp ringing. The telephone in the hallway beckoned, and upon answering, Jenny was greeted not by a familiar voice, but by an odd call from a woman asking for someone who didn't live there, accompanied by strange laughter and clinking glasses in the background. Confused and slightly unnerved, Jenny dismissed the call as a wrong number. Yet as she hung up, a chill ran down her spine, not from the cold night air, but from a creeping sense of unease. Returning to bed, Jenny noticed that the house was unusually quiet. The lights were on and the curtains were undrawn. Unusual, given the children were meticulous about such chores. Something felt amiss, but weariness overtook her worries and she drifted back to sleep. Moments later, a loud thud on the roof startled her awake again, followed by a rolling noise. Concerned but still groggy, Jenny decided to check on the children. As she stepped into the hallway, the suffocating smell of smoke hit her. The house was on fire. The office room where George conducted his business was ablaze, the flames climbing up around the telephone line and fuse box. The heart of their home, now the source of imminent danger. Frantic, Jenny woke George, who immediately roused their older sons. Together, they screamed for the children upstairs, but the response was met with a haunting silence. The fire had engulfed the staircase, blocking any chance of reaching the attic where the younger children slept. As panic set in, George, barefoot and desperate, tried to save his children. He attempted to start his work trucks, hoping to use them as a platform outside to reach the attic window. But neither truck would start, despite functioning perfectly the day before. The family's ladder, usually resting against the house, was mysteriously missing, and a water barrel that could have been used to douse the flames was frozen solid. With their options dwindling and the fire raging, the Sodder family could do nothing but watch in horror as their home and potentially their children were consumed by flames. By the time the fire department arrived, delayed by a lack of manpower and technical difficulties, the house had been reduced to ashes. This tragic night marked the beginning of a mystery that would haunt the Sodder family for generations. The absence of the children's bodies in the aftermath posed a heart-wrenching question. Could they have somehow survived, or was the fire a cruel end to their young lives? As the first light of dawn illuminated the charred remains of what had been a vibrant family home, the Sodder family confronted an inconceivable reality. Their home was destroyed, and 5 of their children were missing, with no signs of them in the debris. What began as shock and confusion quickly morphed into a pressing demand for answers among growing suspicions. Compounding the tragedy was the surprisingly inadequate response from local services. The fire department, hampered by post-war resource shortages, did not arrive until the following morning, a delay that severely compromised the integrity of the fire scene and the subsequent investigation. This delay was inexplicable to the Sodders, given their home's proximity to the fire station, and it fueled doubts about the efficiency and motivations of the local authorities. When Fire Chief Morris finally conducted the search, it was hastily done and concluded with unsettling speed. No remains were found, and the explanation given was that the fire had been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies. However, this claim did not hold up to scrutiny, especially considering that various household items were recovered from the ashes, relatively intact. The rushed and superficial nature of the investigation left the Sodders with more questions than answers, and a growing mistrust of the official findings. George Sodder was driven by a fierce resolve to uncover the truth behind the events of that night. He could not accept the official explanation of an accidental fire caused by faulty wiring, particularly since the family had recently had the electrical system inspected and approved. The memory of recent threats and odd encounters, particularly the foreboding warning that his house would go up in smoke due to his anti-Mussolini sentiments, haunted him and propelled his quest for answers. As the Sodder family attempted to piece together their shattered lives in the wake of the tragedy, deep seated doubts about the official account of the fire began to surface. The more they pondered the events of that night, the more the official explanations seemed to crumble under the scrutiny. The family was particularly baffled by how the home's Christmas lights remained illuminated throughout the fire's early stages, despite the supposed electrical fault that was claimed to have started the blaze. This glaring inconsistency cast doubt on the fire's alleged accidental origin. Their suspicions deepened when they discovered the household ladder, previously thought to have vanished, at the bottom of an embankment some 75 feet from the house. How had it ended up there if not deliberately moved? Further puzzling details emerged when a telephone repairman revealed that the house's phone line had been cut, not burned through as one would expect in a fire. This discovery was linked to a man seen stealing a block and tackle from the property around the same time as the fire. Although arrested and admitting to cutting what he thought was a power line, his involvement with the fire remained unexplained, deepening the mystery. Jenny Sodder, in her own pursuit of truth, conducted her own experiments to challenge the claims that the fire had been hot enough to completely consume human remains. She burned animal bones to test this theory, finding that they were never completely consumed, even under extreme conditions. These findings contradicted the fire chief's assertion that the children's bodies had been burned entirely. Further stirring their doubts was a report from a bus driver who passed by the house on the night of the fire, claiming to have seen individuals throwing, quote, balls of fire at the house. Months later, the youngest Sodder child, Sylvia, found a peculiar object near the home that resembled a military-style incendiary device, possibly explaining the loud thump heard on the roof shortly before the fire erupted. These revelations led the Sodders to believe that the fire had been an act of arson, meticulously planned and executed with chilling precision. Each new piece of evidence suggested a sinister plot against their family, perhaps as retribution for George's vocal criticisms of political matters. Driven by these convictions, the family continued their quest for truth, hoping to uncover what really happened on that fateful Christmas Eve and, most importantly, to determine the fate of their missing children. Dissatisfied with the local response, the Sodders took matters into their own hands. They hired private investigators, sought legal advice, and even reached out to the FBI, driven by a theory that their children had been kidnapped, possibly in retaliation for George's political outspokenness. The billboard they erected on the site of their former home became a stark emblem of their tragedy and determination. It featured the images of their missing children and offered a reward for information. This billboard not only kept the memory of the missing Sodder children alive, but also stood as a public challenge to the official narrative, urging all who passed by to question, remember, and perhaps contribute to the solving of the mystery. Through their relentless pursuit of the truth, the Sodders hoped not only to find their children, but also to expose the failures that had let them down in their darkest hour. Each day, as they maintained the memorial garden they had installed at the site of their former home, the Sodders renewed their commitment to seeking answers, driven by a mixture of grief, hope, and unresolved anger. As the initial shock of the tragedy settled into a grim resolve, the Sodder family's search for their missing children intensified. The Sodders were particularly troubled by several odd incidents that occurred prior to the fire. A visiting insurance salesman had ominously warned George that his house would, quote, go up in smoke because of his anti-Mussolini comments. Another stranger who appeared at their home pointed out two separate fuse boxes as potential fire hazards, despite the recent safety approval by the electric company. These encounters seemed more sinister in retrospect, suggesting possible motives for foul play. Their doubts were further fueled by reported sightings of their children after the fire. One such lead came from a woman who claimed to have seen their children peering from a passing car while the fire was still blazing. Another witness at a Charleston hotel reported seeing the children with a group of Italian speaking adults several days later. Each of these accounts hinted at a possible abduction, giving the Sodders hope that their children might still be alive. Motivated by these mysterious clues, the Sodders hired a private investigator, C.C. Tensley, who dug deeper into the unsettling aspects of the case. Hensley discovered that the insurance salesman who had threatened George was part of the jury at the coroner's inquest. This revelation cast a shadow over the integrity of the inquest's findings and suggested that the fire investigation might have been compromised by personal grudges. The family's persistence led to several excavations of the fire site over the years. In one such excavation, conducted by a pathologist from Washington, D.C., artifacts belonging to the children were unearthed, along with fragments of human vertebrae. However, further analysis by the Smithsonian Institute revealed that the bones likely came from someone older than any of the Sodder children, and were possibly introduced to the Sodder home site when the additional soil was brought in to build the memorial garden. Despite mounting obstacles and the passage of time, the Sodders never ceased their efforts to find their children. They publicized the case through flyers and billboards, offering rewards for information. The billboard became a local landmark, a poignant reminder of the unresolved mystery and a testament to a family's unwavering hope. In their relentless quest to uncover the fate of their children, the Sodder family encountered a myriad of theories and potential leads that suggested their children might still be alive. Each new clue brought a mix of hope and heartache, fueling the determination to discover the truth. One persistent theory was that the children had been abducted, possibly by individuals with a vendetta against George Sodder for his outspoken political views. This theory gained traction due to several eyewitness accounts that surfaced over the years. One of the most compelling came from a woman who claimed she saw the children looking out of a passing car's window while the fire consumed their home. Another sighting occurred at a Charleston hotel where a guest reported seeing the children with a group of Italian-speaking adults. As the years passed, these eyewitness accounts continued to fuel speculation and hope. Then, in the 1960s, a mysterious photograph arrived in the mail, addressed to Jenny Sodder. The photo showed a young man whose features bore a striking resemblance to one of their missing sons, Louis. On the back, written in a familiar hand, were the words, "Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie." The family was convinced that this was a sign that Louis was still alive and reaching out. This photograph renewed their resolve and led them to add it to the public billboard, keeping the children's memories and the mystery alive in the public eye. George Sodder, driven by a father's unwavering love and desperation, personally followed up on every single lead, no matter how faint. His journey took him across the country from New York to Missouri and even to Texas. On one occasion, George traveled to a school in New York City after a tip that his daughter Betty was seen among a group of ballet dancers. Despite his pleas, he was not allowed to see the girl, leaving him with more questions than answers. In another instance, George met two men at a bar who claimed knowledge of the fire. They hinted that they might be his sons, now adults, who had been told they were orphans. Though the conversation was cryptic and their identities remained unconfirmed, this encounter added another layer of complexity and sadness to the ongoing search. Throughout these decades of searching, George never lost hope. He pursued each clue with a determination that only a father's love could fuel. These endless pursuits, though often leading to dead ends, demonstrated the lengths to which he would go to find his children or at least learn of their fate. As the years passed, the mystery of the Sodder children's disappearance continued to echo through the hearts and minds of all who heard their story. The Sodder family's relentless quest for truth became a poignant symbol of unresolved grief and undying hope. George and Jenny Sodder, along with their surviving children, faced each day with the heavy burden of unanswered questions. Yet the Sodders' efforts were relentless. Despite these efforts, the case remained cold with no definitive answers. The physical reminder of their search, a billboard featuring the faces of their missing children, stood along the West Virginia highway for decades. It was not just a call for information, but also a memorial, a public testament to a tragedy that had consumed the family. The billboard finally came down in 1989, following Jenny Sodder's death. But the story did not end with its removal. The case of the Sodder children left an indelible mark on the community and became part of local lore. It raised awareness about the limitations and failures of emergency response systems and investigations during that era. It also highlighted the deep bonds of family and the lengths to which parents will go to protect and seek justice for their children. George Sodder passed away in 1969, holding on to the belief that his children might still be out there. Jenny spent her remaining years wearing black in mourning, a visual manifestation of her unending grief and steadfast determination. The young Sodders continued the search, motivated by their parents' unwavering resolve. In the end, the mystery of what happened to the Sodder children remains unsolved. It is a haunting tale of loss and mystery, a narrative that continues to intrigue and sadden those who come across it. The absence of definitive answers leaves the story open to interpretation and speculation. The story of the Sodder children is not just a tale of a tragic night. It is a story about the determination of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. We'd love to know what you think. What do you think happened to the Sodder children? Did they die in the fire that night? Were they kidnapped and convinced they were orphaned? Did they run away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're there, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Well, my friends, we have come to the end of another fabulous dinner party. We hope you enjoyed this story tonight, and we hope to see you at the table again next time. Until then, my friends, may your gatherings always be eclectic and your stories compelling. Good night.